President Donald Trump had always been known for his boldness, but today felt different. A handwritten letter had arrived, sent by a small-town farmer, John Mitchell, inviting him to visit his struggling farm. Instead of ignoring it, Trump did something unexpected. He accepted. As the presidential convoy rolled onto the farm, Secret Service agents scanned the land with cautious eyes. John, a proud third-generation farmer, wiped his hands on his overalls before extending a firm handshake. "Mr. President, I appreciate you coming, but I won't sugarcoat my words." Trump smirked. "I wouldn't expect anything less." John wasn't one to waste time. "Sir, politicians make big promises, but farmers are drowning. Prices drop, fuel costs rise. Are you here to listen or just to talk?" Trump raised an eyebrow. "John, I respect farmers, but things take time." John scoffed. "We don't have time. Our land suffers, families break under debt, and big corporations keep buying out small farms." Trump crossed his arms. "I've done more for farmers than most presidents." John didn't back down. "Then why am I still struggling?" Tension filled the air. Secret Service agents shifted uneasily, unsure if this meeting would spiral into an argument. Then, John's wife, Lisa, stepped in, easing the moment. "Gentlemen, let's sit down." Inside their modest kitchen, John pointed at the fridge. "Mr. President, we grow food for thousands but can barely afford our own groceries." Trump frowned. "What's stopping you from succeeding?" John leaned in. "Big corporations. They buy land, drive down prices, and push out small farmers." Trump tapped the table. "That's capitalism." John clenched his jaw. "There's a difference between competition and being crushed." Trump looked at Lisa as she placed a plate of homemade cornbread in front of him. "Mr. President, taste what struggling America really is." Trump chewed thoughtfully. "It's good." Lisa smiled sadly. "We sell this at the market, but barely make enough." John sighed. "Farming isn't just a job, Mr. President. It's our life. Our kids should inherit this land, not debt." Trump nodded. "I hear you." John leaned in closer. "But do you understand us?" For the first time, Trump really looked around. At the humble home, the worn-out furniture, the crack in the wall. This wasn't a boardroom. This wasn't a campaign rally. This was the heart of America, where words weren't enough. For once, Trump had to listen. John rolled up his sleeves. "Let me show you something." Outside, he held up his hands, calloused, cracked, dirt-stained. "These hands have worked the soil since I was a boy. My father's hands looked the same, and his before him." Trump studied them. "Hard work." John nodded. "But hard work alone isn't enough anymore." Trump exhaled. "So, what do you want from me?" John looked him in the eye. "Not handouts. Not speeches. Real change. Policies that don't just help corporations, but protect us, the backbone of this country." Trump was silent, then smirked. "Ever driven a tractor?" Trump chuckled. "Not lately." John led him to his old John Deere. "Hop in." Trump hesitated, then climbed up. John handed him the controls. This is what feeds America." Trump slowly maneuvered the tractor forward, gripping the wheel tightly. It wasn't easy. John leaned in. "See, Mr. President, this is more than business. It's personal." Trump nodded, a rare look of reflection crossing his face. "I get it." John wasn't convinced. "Do you?" Trump looked out at the endless fields. "Maybe not fully, but I'm starting to." As they walked back, John wiped sweat from his brow. "We aren't lazy. We aren't asking for favors. But banks treat us like risks while corporations get bailouts." Trump frowned. "I believe in free markets." John shook his head. "Markets should be fair, not rigged." Trump sighed. "The system's complicated." John scoffed. "Not to us. It's simple. If we fail, America's food supply fails." Trump looked at the barn, the land, the sheer effort it took just to survive. For the first time, he saw not just numbers and policies, but people. And that changed everything. Lisa walked over. "Would you like to stay for dinner, Mr. President?" Trump blinked. Dinner? John chuckled. We're blunt, but we're hospitable. Trump hesitated. His schedule was tight. His advisors would object. But he nodded. All right. Lisa smiled. Good. You'll see what real farm food tastes like. John smirked. And hear more of my complaints. Trump laughed. Figured. As they walked inside, John thought, maybe, just maybe, this visit would make a difference. He just hoped Trump would remember this conversation long after he left. What he didn't know was, Trump wouldn't forget. 2 weeks later, John was fixing a fence when his phone rang. This is John. A familiar voice responded. John, it's Donald Trump. John nearly dropped his phone. Mr. President? I didn't forget you. I've got something in motion. John's heart pounded. What do you mean? You'll see soon enough. Click. John stared at his phone. He had doubted Trump would remember. But maybe, just maybe, something was happening. Lisa walked over. Who was that? John smirked. The President of the United States. And for the first time in years, John felt something unexpected. Hope. A month later, John sat in his truck, listening to the radio. We have breaking news, the reporter announced. President Trump has signed an executive order aimed at protecting small farmers from unfair corporate practices. John's jaw dropped. Lisa rushed outside. Did you hear? John jumped out of his truck. He actually did something. Farmers across the country watched in shock. A president had listened. A president had acted. John wasn't easily impressed. But this was real. For the first time in a long time, small farmers felt seen. And it had all started with one letter. One afternoon, a black SUV rolled onto John's farm. A Secret Service agent stepped out. Mr. Mitchell, the president wants to see you. John blinked. Again? Minutes later, Trump stepped out, extending a hand. Told you I wouldn't forget. John shook his head, grinning. I'll admit I'm impressed. Trump smirked. I don't just talk. I deliver. Lisa welcomed them inside. So, what brings you back, Mr. President? Trump leaned forward. I want to hear more. There's still work to do. John was speechless. A president had returned. Not for a photo op, but to listen. And that meant everything. Months later, John stood in his fields, watching his kids run through the crops. Lisa smiled. You changed things. John shook his head. We did. From one conversation, a movement had begun. Farmers were no longer forgotten. And it had all started with a simple letter, one Donald Trump had chosen to read. Because sometimes, the most unexpected conversations change history. And this one did.